Spoiler alert, if you want to get the highest frame rates possible in the latest titles, then you need the perfect CPU and GPU combo. Some games demand the highest grade of graphics card to run smoothly, while others need a beefy CPU to stop stuttering and bottlenecking. So what exactly is it that you should be buying? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we come in. As throughout this video, we're going to be walking you through the very best CPU and GPU combos so you can enjoy your favorite games without any stutter, lag, and to get the best bang for your buck. We're going to be looking at all budgets and price tags, and will help you to find the perfect combination for you in the games that you actually play. So join us as we walk you through absolutely everything you need to know right after a short word from this video sponsor. Corsair's brand new 2500 series of cases has arrived, proving serious airflow can come in small sizes. This M80X enclosure fits huge graphics cards and coolers, and thanks to its dual chamber design, building is a breeze. I've even equipped mine with Corsair's new IQ RX fans, which comes with new magnetic dome bearings for quieter acoustics and Corsair's air guide technology for more directed airflow. Learn more today with the link down below. Sweet, so let's get cracking. What exactly is it that you need to know when buying your CPU and your graphics card? Well, firstly, that both of these things are incredibly important, but also that a lot of people get this completely wrong. And they overspend on one component and then leave themselves with inferior performance in the process. And I know that this might sound a little bit backwards. I mean, if you overspend, how can you get less performance? But obviously, relatively speaking, we all have a budget for our gaming rig, and if you spend more on one thing, it usually means that you need to spend less on another. As both the central processing unit and graphics card directly dictate the performance of your games in nearly all cases, of course most of your budget should go towards these, but you do need to balance them out so that one isn't significantly holding the other back. It's worth remembering that your PC will always have a bottleneck, that single one component that holds everything back, but in an ideal world this should vary and fluctuate. All of the components inside your PC should be doing a bit of an exotic salsa dance, or a salsa verde if you're more of a foodie. But for those of you that aren't foodie dancers, and in the interest of utmost clarity, let's say you buy an RTX 4070 and then you pair it with an i3 CPU. This will probably run a lot of games really well. But the processor is quite weak relative, an emphasis on that word, to that of the graphics card. So there'll be a lot of games where the CPU holds back your GPU and your frame rate suffers as a result. I think that this is the scenario that a lot of people are already aware of, the CPU bottleneck. Bad, scary, avoid. But then a lot of people tend to overcompensate and then do the complete opposite. Let's run our scenario again, but this time it's an RTX 4060 with a Ryzen 7800 X3D. This combination costs roughly the same, but I'd wager in a lot of titles, your performance is going to be pretty similar, if not actually worse, as your CPU bottleneck is almost certainly long gone. The weaker graphics card now holds you back. You tried to be clever, didn't you? But all you've done is swap one extreme for the other. You need your PC to be as balanced as possible, as all things should be. One final time then, let's run our optimal system, the middle ground. We can actually get a Radeon RX 7700 XT or an RTX 4060 Ti 16GB, and then a Ryzen 7 7700 CPU for roughly the same price. Now, neither of these parts are the absolute strongest, but because they're a lot more balanced, your frame rate should work out smoother with fewer sudden dips, less dramatic bottlenecks, one way or the other. You should also be aware that not all games and game settings are created equally, and some people will need a more focused system than others. If you play a lot of large and heavy multiplayer games, for example, like Battlefield or Call of Duty Warzone, then these really heavily rely on the CPU, so are more likely to bottleneck. The same applies to simulation games like Civilization, City Skylines, or Planet Zoo, where the AI has to calculate a lot of turns, or you've got a lot of character models, a lot of humans walking about, or I suppose in the case of Planet Zoo, just a whole lot of zebras. If you play a lot more traditional games though, especially ones that aren't brand new AAA releases, then these tend to be more heavily weighted towards the GPU, so having a $100 better graphics card will probably yield a higher frame rate than having a $100 better processor. And I do understand that at this point in the video there's still probably quite a few people that are a bit confused around CPUs, processors, how they work, and what it is that you need to know. So if you do want a more in-depth deep dive and you want us to talk about frame rates of loads of different CPUs so you can actually make a comparison and choose the one that's right for you, then you can find a full video that we've done in the top right corner of your screen, or obviously you can just wait for the full combinations where we'll walk you through everything at the right price point. But one last thing before we get to the recommendations is that you should please always bear in mind the resolution that you're going to be playing the games at, because higher resolutions actually require much heavier GPUs to run smoothly, but they don't really require that much extra from the CPU. Now this is down to the fact that the processor is handling the game logic, AI, and physics, rather than actually rendering out the pixels, so its job doesn't really change much when you crank up to 4K. Therefore, if you are going to, or have already upgraded to a high-res screen, then this is another reason to prioritize the graphics card over the CPU. So yes, definitely quite a lot to think about then, probably about 4 pages of script and about 2 hours of writing, but ultimately, in a sentence, what you need to do is find the best graphics card that you can that fits within your budget, but then also get a CPU that can keep up with it without overly holding it back. It's all a game of balancing. I mean, the number one thing that I see, and it does frustrate me, I'm sorry if this affects you, but it's true, is that I see everyone saying that the 7800X3D is the best chip, everyone needs it. If you buy anything else, you're a fool. But in actual fact, it really is the opposite, because it's all relative based on what you're going to buy. If you're buying an entry-level graphics card or even like a mid-tier one, then spending £350 or $350 on a processor is frankly a waste of money. You don't need it, and if your CPU is too powerful, it's not going to hurt, but it is going to mean that you're going to lose performance from the graphics card if you have to make the choice to cut that down. So please bear in mind it's all a balancing act, and to demonstrate this, we can now move on to the recommendations at every single price point. And don't forget the current pricing for all of these is listed down below. I'm back, I survived, what are the chances? But up first, we have the budget-friendly option, and here we'd recommend the AMD Radeon RX 6600 and the Intel Arc A580 and A750 GPUs. Now pricing shuffles around on these a lot, so the best option will change every week, but generally speaking aim for around about $150, $160 on the A580 and about $190 for the other two. The performance of all three cards is actually surprisingly similar, but in optimized titles you'd probably prefer the Arc cards, whereas in the rest, the Radeon, so it balances out. Having said this though, if you do want to stream or record your game specifically, then both the Arc cards have an AV1 encoder, so you can get higher quality recordings if you're using Intel Arc. As for the CPUs to pair with these, well, if you're on the tightest of budgets, then I'd actually look at the i3-12100F. It's an oldie, but a goldie, but it is only quad-core, so it does have some limitations. Fortunately, in the last few months there have been some really good price drops on the Intel i5-12400F, which is a really flexible little 6-core chip, and if you excuse the pun, it offers great performance across the board. But of course you could also consider going for AMD, and specifically AM4. It's a bit of an older platform, but they're actually still releasing chips for it, surprisingly enough, and as long as you're willing to forgo a few features, my most notable one really is obviously the fact that you're not going to get that many more chips, if any, coming out, but then also things like USB headers and things on the board are missing, you don't have the latest PCIe speeds, not things that really matter at this price point, but obviously be aware that you're buying into a platform that is older. But if you're happy to do this, or you've already got an AM4 board, then something like a 5600X is going to be a brilliant shout. Now I'm sure a lot of you guys are already screaming this at the screen right now, but there is an absolute gem of a CPU on AM4, but we'll come to that in just a second, and instead step up to the mid-range, and the chip will soon reveal itself. But first, let's chat GPUs. And here there are three main options. The AMD Radeon 7600, the NVIDIA RTX 4060, then any previous generation Radeon you can get in the sale. I'd argue that this price point is the absolute sweet spot for multiplayer gamers that want crazy high FPS, but don't want to invest hundreds and hundreds of pounds of dollars for the privilege. Both the 4060 and 7600 come with 8GB of VRAM and very similar performance. Generally speaking, they play games at high settings very well, though in the most demanding games you will need to turn some of the textures down a touch, especially at 1440p. If this bothers you, and you're happy to spend just a smidgen more, then maybe seek out an RX 6700 XT or a 6750 XT, as both of these can be found for a similar price on a good day, and should comfortably outperform them both, though they don't support the excellent DLSS tech that you'll find on Team Green. But here comes the bit that you've been waiting for. The star of the CPU show on AM4 actually is the Ryzen 5700 X3D, as you can find this for under £200. It's an 8-core chip, and the performance actually isn't that far off the best of the best, all for something that's on an older platform, and I'd say in the UK is available for under £200. Granted, this chip does have some kryptonite, as there's no upgrade path here other than a 5800 X3D, which is essentially the same thing anyway, so you'll be stuck with it until you dump your motherboard entirely. Instead then, if you do want something you can upgrade for years to come, also consider the excellent 7600, a 6-core Ryzen chip that uses AM5, for similar enough performance, yet plenty of upgrades later down the road and much more motherboard motherboard features. Other good options are again the Intel i5-12400F or even a 12600K, though that, like the 5700X3D, does require a third-party cooler to keep it cool and thus raises the cost to entry. For those who like to live a little bit more dangerously, you could also opt for a Ryzen 5 7500F from AliExpress, which is an AM5 system integrated chip that does have very similar performance to the 7600, but for almost half the cost. But let's up the ante, shall we, to 1440p. And here, this is actually a little bit of a weak spot for Nvidia. Because frankly, for some ludicrous reason, the only GPU that Nvidia sells in this spot is the RTX 4060 Ti. So this is between £300 and £500 of dollars. And you get it in both 8 and 16 gig flavors, but it uses a mere 128-bit memory bus that actually hurts its performance at higher resolutions, which is the whole point of spending more money on a GPU. And it also has a price tag that, even in the sales, is still really hard to justify. So instead, we'd much rather point you towards arguably the best two GPUs that you can get on sale today: the AMD Radeon 7700 XT and the 7800 XT. Both of these cards offer awesome frame rates in essentially any game, and have enough VRAM to run the highest settings without any major stutters. If you can spend the extra money, then personally I'd much rather go for the 7800 XT for the extra performance and then an extra 4GB of VRAM, but to be fair, the 7700 XT has come down in price massively to make it a great option in its own right. As for the CPU they should pair with them, well, frankly, the Ryzen 7 7700, the X or the non-X, is probably going to be optimal really in terms of price to performance, but again, if you already have AM4, then the 5700X3D is probably going to be the right choice. Or if you do want to step it up because you are running really CPU heavy titles, then you could consider the Ryzen 7 7800X3D. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Nah, hang on, stop the video a second. What I've just done there is kind of put a trap by accident, but it's going to be the best example throughout this whole video about what people do wrong. So I've just said, if you play a lot of CPU-heavy titles, then you could consider upping that 7700 CPU to a 7800 X3D CPU. Are we aware of what I've said? I'm saying spend more money. I'm not saying cut back on the GPU, because it'd be very easy to misinterpret that and say,
okay, well, I want to go for the X3D, so I'll just save some money. I won't get the 7800 XT graphics card. I'll go for the 7700 XT graphics card and get the X3D. That will be better, right?
No. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'd much rather go for a Ryzen 7700 and have a 7800 XT than go for a 7800 X3D CPU but a 7700 XT graphics card. AMD have not helped me with this example because the things are basically called the exact same thing, but essentially don't cut back on your graphics card, cut back on your CPU. And if you can't do that, save a little bit more money and buy them in like a month's time. I know that's crap. Please don't cut back your graphics card because that will actually hurt you more than you think. You don't need the highest end CPU, even for gaming. Certainly not this price point. Moving swiftly on though, and upping the ante yet again, now specifically talking about 1440p high frame rate and ultra-wide and light 4K, we have several GPUs, and frankly, just the one GOAT CPU to choose from. And the first contender is this, the RTX 4070, which is quite easy to recommend, to be honest. You get a little bit of a smaller card because they tend to be more power efficient. It's going to mean you have a quieter system, they'll be a bit smaller so you can put them into ITX rigs, things like that. But realistically, the main advantage I think that most people will find with an NVIDIA GPU is that you get access to all of NVIDIA's features. The main ones really being better ray tracing and DLSS super resolution and frame gen. Now, I will say AMD is definitely catching up with their FSR technology and their frame gen, but the difference, for better or worse, is that if you have an NVIDIA card, you can use AMD's tech, but if you're on AMD, you can't use NVIDIA's tech. So if you want to use these technologies, which in my experience are anywhere from a lot to slightly better than AMD's, then you can go for this. However, if you do kind of favor having more VRAM, because there's only 12 gig of VRAM on the 4070 and also the 4070 Super, then you could step up to something like this, which is the 7900 GRE, which is the Golden Rabbit edition. It was only in Asia, but we now get it over here, which is cool. And both the 7900 GRE and 7900 XT pretty much steal the show when it comes to price to performance at this sort of price point. I mean, they're still not the best value cards ever, but compared to Nvidia, you're definitely getting more bang for your buck here, and you're getting loads of performance that, especially in things like Apex Legends Legends or maybe Call of Duty Warzone. You're going to absolutely love the performance that's on offer here. But of course, this is GPU and CPU combos, so you're going to need a chip to pair with it, and this is the point where we unveil the legendary Ryzen 7 7800X3D, which is an 8-core chip, but it is pretty much the de facto best gaming CPU you can buy. Now remember, just because it's the best doesn't mean you need it. The reason we're now going for this is because we've got so much GPU horsepower, we also need to bring up that CPU horsepower to balance it out. Again, don't buy this if you're buying like a 4060 or something, because you're frankly wasting your money. Like, you would be better off buying a better GPU rather than spending it on this chip. But because we have so much graphics card horsepower, we need a better chip. I hope that is coming across, because that is the whole point of this video, and if you don't get that, I have failed. But hang on a minute. What about Intel? Why are we not talking about them? Well, essentially, Intel do offer very similar gaming performance with their 14th gen i7 and i9 CPUs, but they're more expensive, they require more costly cooling, they output more heat, and they require a potentially performance-limiting BIOS update to prevent CPU damage. So they're not exactly screaming out to be recommended right now, though I promise we will be testing these shortly, and we can do a proper overview to see if the BIOS update actually changes anything. But of course, this is 2024. If you want to quite literally throw thousands of pounds at a computer manufacturer to buy a graphics card, they will take your money and give you something in return. And at this price point, we actually do have a couple more CPUs we can talk about, but essentially the graphics cards are going to be as follows. Now, the one, I've spoken about this before, I would get if I wasn't doing this channel, that's the main emphasis there, for my personal gaming rig would probably be the RTX 4070 Ti Super. This is an updated card, it's got 16GB of VRAM, so I'm happy that this is going to be future-proof now and into the foreseeable future. It's got loads of horsepower and it can play games at 4K as long as you are willing to use DLSS, which, as we know, is very good, so it's definitely not much of an issue. Now, it definitely will depend on the title, but you can also enable ray tracing on this card, and it's going to chug along as long as it's not something like Alan Wake 2 with all the settings cranked to max. That will then fall to something like the RTX 4080 Super. That is definitely a fair bit more expensive, but will comfortably allow you to use ray tracing at pretty much any resolution as long as you're not going for full path tracing. But if the RTX 4080 Super still isn't good enough and you demand absolute max everything, 4K, every single game, then yes, this is when the RTX 4090 comes into play. And it doesn't give a rat's ass about value, I'll tell you that. But instead, it spits out the very best gaming experience that you can have by a country mile. It is quite frankly unfair just how good this card is. But it costs almost $2,000. So it doesn't exactly give good value now, does it? So instead, if you do find yourself in that slightly awkward combination of having a really high-end TV or monitor and you want high refresh rate but still want to represent good value for money, then you're going to have to look at AMD with something like the 7900 and then the 7900 XTX, as both of these cards are perfect for Call of Duty and essentially anything where you're going to be pushing raw and hard FPS and you're not really that fussed about ray tracing. Now, rather confusingly, I did say that there are now more options at this price point, which is kind of odd, right? Bear in mind this is the highest end, so surely you still want the best gaming CPU. And yes, but there are now alternative options, because frankly, if you're spending this amount of money on a graphics card, you probably also have the budget for some other components as well. So if you're using your PC for anything else, then if you do go for an i9 CPU, we'd probably recommend the i7 because it's cheaper and performance is still quite similar. Then you might find that you have a more complete system. And if you're wanting to stick with AMD, then you could look at something like the 7950X or the 7950X3D, as both of these chips are excellent for gaming. They're not quite as fast as this, but to be fair, the X3D 7950X isn't that far behind. And then, as I say, you'd have a more complete system that's not only going to do the caching or preloading of textures and things faster, which is great, but as I say, if you use your PC for productivity, it's going to be better for this as well. And I will also give an honorable, not an honorable mention, a dishonorable mention to Ryzen 9000 that has just launched, and frankly, it's not very good because the real world price is so much higher than Ryzen 7000 that no one at this point in time really should consider buying one. I'm sure there's someone out there that thinks, yes, this is the right chip for me, but until these become discontinued or until the price of Ryzen 9000 actually comes down, we're not actively recommending them because it's kind of baffling, really. Forgetting all of that, if you have any questions, let us know down in the comment section, and I'll do my best to answer them as we'll edit a car, we'll go through, as I say, because yeah, I know it can get confusing. And again, if you do want to check out our full video on the best CPUs and explain everything, you can find that video in the top right corner of your screen. But if you've enjoyed this video, please smash that like button, let us know you've enjoyed it, get yourself subscribed, and as I say, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this video, all of these combinations will be listed down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not bask in the greatness of Corsair's 2500 series of cases? This stunning new chassis takes your build to the next level, with support for cooling at the top, bottom, rear and side, in addition to showing your PC parts in their best light. You can even pair it with Corsair's new IQ RX fans, for seamless cable management thanks to IQ Link, with awesome acoustic and thermal performance in both RGB and solid flavors. Upgrade today with the link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.